You ready?
Yeah.
This may come as a surprise to some of you, especially given the fact that two of my most recent uploads are a pair of 40-minute-long video essays defending the first two Jurassic Park sequels, but
Hold on to your butts.
I wasn't fully sold on Jurassic World Rebirth when it was announced, primarily when David Leitch was still attached to direct. Unlike many of my peers, I've never bought into the idea that the Jurassic sequels are an affront to cinema. I mean, again, I literally just made 2 videos vouching for these movies. Yet, despite my seemingly endless capacity to appreciate this franchise, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach telling me that this was a bad idea. I mean, Universal didn't even wait until Dominion's body was cold before charging headfirst into pre-production on what would be the franchise's 3rd relaunch in just 32 years. And sure, from a box office perspective, it makes sense to keep things chugging along.
We're gonna make a fortune.
These movies are financial juggernauts, but even as a dyed-in-the-wool defender of Colin Trevorrow's Jurassic World trilogy, it's hard to deny that the series was starting to show signs of fatigue. Over their 3 films, Trevorrow and his longtime writing partner Derek Connolly introduced a whole host of new concepts into the franchise, doing away with the last vestiges of the theme park idea that had made the original story so unique amidst a sea of paleofiction, and effectively transforming the world of Jurassic Park into a full-blown alternate reality in which dinosaurs have proliferated far beyond the shores of Muertes Archipelago, forcing humanity to live alongside them in a less fantastical dinotopia. Even though each entry of the World Trilogy did gangbusters at the global box office, with each subsequent entry, there was a growing sense among audiences that maybe these movies had strayed a little too far from the spirit of the original and taken the series in a direction that would be difficult to sustain interest in long term. So, seeing the studio rush straight into yet another iteration of the series before the dust had even settled on Trevorrow's controversial trilogy set off alarm bells immediately. Even if the film promised to serve as a soft reboot of the series the way Rebirth seemed to be, what with the subtitle suggesting a new beginning for the franchise, it was hard to imagine how that'd even be possible at this point. The World Trilogy had fundamentally altered the DNA of the Jurassic franchise and reoriented it around ideas that couldn't be so easily swept under the rug. Short of a total reboot, which would be a hilariously bad idea in and of itself, how do you take Jurassic Park back to its roots without straight up pretending the World Trilogy hadn't happened? Something Universal wasn't about to do, if only because they were so popular with the general audience. My concerns were compounded by the fact that despite the title, Rebirth didn't actually appear to be all that interested in course-correcting the series. If anything, each new revelation about the film seemed to indicate it intended to do the exact opposite. This looked to be business as usual. Not only was the world naming convention retained, a decision likely made for brand synergy reasons, but one that signaled a continuation of the previous trilogy's priorities. But it was quickly revealed that the plot would primarily concern an idea already explored extensively throughout Trevorrow's films, that being dino hybrids, now renamed mutants, a distinction without a meaningful difference as far as I was concerned. The only thing staving off outright pessimism was the creative team that came in after Leitch exited the project. You see, Rebirth wasn't just set to be another Jurassic Park sequel. It would mark the grand return of David Koepp, the writer who, alongside Michael Crichton, penned the script for Steven Spielberg's original Jurassic Park, as well as its sequel, the grossly underrated The Lost World Jurassic Park, brought back into the fold at the behest of Spielberg himself. But then you throw a director like Gareth Edwards into the mix, and suddenly that subbed pessimism starts to look a bit like cautious optimism. I fucking love Gareth Edwards. As the director of Rogue One, my favorite Star Wars film, and 2014's Godzilla, Edwards has quietly built a reputation as one of the most exciting filmmakers currently within the studio system. You can criticize both of those films all you want, I don't really care, but they are undeniably incredible feats of technical filmmaking. His ability to almost seamlessly integrate visual effects into a frame is second to maybe only James Cameron, all the while imbuing those digital assets with a tangible sense of scale, mass, and verisimilitude. I mean, did you guys see The Creator? Like, what the actual fuck, man? Like, how does an $80 million movie look this good? Even if he wasn't a technical wizard, dude just knows how to frame cinematic shots. This shit, that right there, That's art, baby. Now imagine that technical prowess coupled with a screenplay by the guy who wrote the original Jurassic Park. I mean, Jesus, it was almost enough to make me forget every single one of my reservations. And so I know what you're thinking. I get it. You're like, here comes the part where I pull the rug out from under you and reveal that my initial concerns were actually well-founded. Then no matter how stellar the team behind the camera, Jurassic World Rebirth was unable to overcome the hand it was dealt and ultimately continues this franchise's gradual drift off of its foundation. But miraculously, that isn't the case. If there's a twist here, it's that Jurassic World Rebirth is every bit as fantastic as I probably should have assumed it would be given the talent involved. Not without its flaws, mind you, and certainly not on the same level as the original, but a very welcome return to form for a franchise that, for as much as I've consistently enjoyed each entry, was starting to lose a bit of its luster. Walking out of Rebirth for the first time, I was struck by how much it felt like a near-perfect synthesis of The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. And no, it's not just because I did videos on both of those films, it just happened to be this, kind of keeping in line with the fact of why I feel this is a unofficial Jurassic Park 4. I know that for a lot of you, that isn't a particularly ringing endorsement, but hear me out. Because I don't mean that it resembles those films in terms of quality, although I'd argue, and have argued, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. Rather, I mean, it quite literally plays like a composite of the first two Jurassic sequels. Take, for example, the film's plot, which owes a hell of a lot to The Lost World, revolving around a crew of mercenaries tasked with infiltrating a remote island that was once the site of a covert InGen research lab to retrieve prehistoric assets. That said, however, I'd hesitate to call the film a straight-up retread the way I would something like Jurassic World. Despite a familiar premise, Rebirth isn't just reiterating the glory days for the sake of convenience. Koepp simply used a tried and true foundation to springboard into newer territory. Unlike The Lost World, which was primarily concerned with InGen's efforts to recapture Hammond's dinosaurs and rebuild Jurassic Park, Rebirth is preoccupied with an entirely different means of dino exploitation, one that feels unique within the franchise while remaining firmly rooted in the themes of scientific malfeasance and corporate greed that informed both of Crichton's books. The mission in Rebirth concerns the interests of a pharmaceutical company, Parkergenics, that plans to synthesize a drug for heart disease using biomaterial extracted from the largest living dinosaurs on Earth, who, thanks to their large cardiovascular systems and relative longevity when compared to humans, hold the key to this scientific breakthrough in their DNA. It's kinda wild that it took 7 films to arrive at Big Pharma wants to use the dinosaurs to make medicines, considering how rooted these films are in genetic research. To put it into perspective, the Trevorrow trilogy tackled human cloning and GMO crops before we even alluded to the subject. That's fucking crazy, man. I love it, but goddamn, it's like pharmaceuticals right there. Why? Anyways, but like I said, Rebirth doesn't just pull from The Lost World. It simultaneously plays like a more fleshed out version of Jurassic Park 3, devoting a significant portion of its runtime to a survival story involving a civilian family fighting for their lives in a jungle reclaimed by prehistoric monsters. Hell, there's even Spinosauruses in this one. Obviously, David Koepp didn't write Jurassic Park 3 himself, but we know the idea to recenter the story on a rescue mission to the island came from him. And it seems pretty clear to me that Rebirth is, at least on some level, an attempt to take another stab at a similar idea. The point of difference this time around is that the family in question, the Delgados, aren't trying to get to the island. In fact, they aren't even aware it exists. Instead, they only become marooned there after their boat is attacked by Directorial Mosasaurus and they're rescued by the mercenaries. In this way, it almost more resembles an earlier iteration of Jurassic Park 3 that saw a group of teens stranded on the island. We even get a teen romance subplot between Teresa and Xavier. Taking a step back, it's actually kind of hilarious just how much of this film feels like Koepp reconstituting unused concepts from the previous entries. I mean, Exhibit A, the mutant dinosaurs. Although they certainly found their way into the script thanks to the prominence of hybrids in Trevorrow's trilogy, they also call to mind the super raptors that were originally conceived for The Lost World before being scrapped for being too out there. Oh, how the times have changed. Speaking of out there, they also feel somewhat reminiscent of the human dinosaur hybrids in John Sayles' infamous draft for Jurassic Park 4. Then, There's the river raft sequence. Most everyone knows that this is a set piece lifted directly from Crichton's original novel, in that it was cut from the original Jurassic Park, and they even tried to work it into the Lost World before being like, it's just not gonna work. Reincorporating old ideas in this way is such a hallmark of the way Spielberg approaches sequels. I mean, just look at the development of literally every Indiana Jones film after Raiders. And so it honestly wouldn't surprise me if circling back to these concepts was his main impetus for bringing Koepp back in the first place. More than any Jurassic sequel since maybe Jurassic World, Steven Spielberg's fingerprints are all over Rebirth. Not only did he develop the story with David Koepp, but the man he helped choose to ultimately captain the ship made great pains to honor the cinematic grammar he established for the series back in 1993. Edwards manages to evoke the distinctive look and feel of the first two films without it ever feeling like he's trying to emulate it. I think a big part of the reason why is that they almost always feel motivated. Using this shot that originally depicted the T-Rex hot on the heels of Ellie and Malcolm to introduce a character tells us something. This man is bad news. While Krebs' villainy isn't some huge reveal, he's a pharmaceutical rep after all, introducing him in this way cleverly leverages the cinematic language of the franchise to create an effective shorthand. The same goes for that banner shot, which foreshadows the end of the public love affair with dinosaurs, just as it did the end of Hammond's dream in the original. And what's especially refreshing about Edwards' approach to visual quotes when compared to previous entries is that he isn't just quoting Jurassic Park. The movie is made with such a clear reverence for Steven Spielberg's filmography, with visual allusions to the likes of Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a moment when Krebs steps off a boat in Suriname that is almost identical to this shot of Belloq in Raiders that I just about jumped out of my seat when I saw it. Like, what an insane deep cut. That's how you know that Gareth Edwards gets it. But a few clever nods to another filmmaker's work does not an interestingly shot film make. Edwards artfully weaves his own filmmaking DNA through the film. In classic Edwards style, almost every shot in Rebirth conveys mood and scale effortlessly. The obvious example is the Titanosauruses, which genuinely look enormous, but I was even more blown away by the T-Rex, in part because it's a dinosaur we've seen countless times already. Yet, Edwards and cinematographer John Matheson find a way to make this thing look unfathomably large, even at extreme wide shots. There's also a welcomed grubbiness to the look of the film, coming hot off the heels of the Trevorrow films, all three of which had a somewhat sterile look about them thanks to the glossy blue hues that permeated exterior shots across all three entries. There's an earthiness to Rebirth's palette that feels much more in line with the first three entries in the series. Edwards' insistence on shooting on location in Thailand with Panavision film cameras pays dividends because each frame feels so rich, a feeling that's only enhanced by how well most of the digital assets are blended into the scene. Edwards also continues to prove his bona fides as an action director, delivering some of the best thrills of the series. The extended Mosasaur chase is exceptional, as is the cliffside encounter with the Quetzalcoatlus, but by far the biggest standout among the film's many set pieces is the river raft chase. More a suspense sequence than pure action spectacle, I've waited to see this moment rendered in live action for decades now, and Jesus Christ, it doesn't disappoint. The outdoors have never felt so claustrophobic as the T-Rex bears down the hopelessly ill-equipped Delgado family, while Alexander Despla's uncannily Williams-esque score relentlessly ramps up the tension. It's unambiguously the best set piece in a Jurassic film since the birdcage in Jurassic Park 3. And you know what? I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. But the fact Gareth Edwards directed a gorgeous and tangible looking film with an incredible sense of scale and propulsive action isn't really news to anyone. I could have assumed that without even seeing it. What makes Rebirth really stand out in my eyes is its deceptively effective storytelling. While the plot isn't particularly complex, this is actually to the film's benefit, as it allows the characters to be the engine that drives the narrative. The narrative is more or less shaped by how the characters react to the series of extenuating circumstances they find themselves in, which puts a lot of weight on those characters, because if narrative progression is primarily driven by the way characters react and interact with both the situation and one another, thankfully, David Koepp is a talented writer who understands this implicitly and creates a cast of characters who are surprisingly dimensional. Are they the most well-rounded characters ever conceived? No, but across the board, Koepp and Edwards ensure that we, at the very least, understand who all of these people are, what they care about, what drives them, and how this experience is affecting them. Take Zora Bennett. I really didn't expect much from this character going in. I mean, I like Scarlett Johansson, but she didn't strike me as being anything more than an Owen Grady substitute, the ever-sarcastic and tough-as-nails action lead of the film. But shockingly, she's actually a much more empathetic character. The backstory we get about her unresolved grief over her recently deceased longtime work partner isn't anything groundbreaking, but it humanizes what could otherwise have been a pretty one-note hero role. Likewise, we learn early on that Zora's mother died of heart disease thanks to an unsuccessful attempt at emotional blackmail by Krebs. But this isn't just an incidental detail meant to telegraph Krebs' callousness, because although Zora acts unfazed, we later learn that her mother's death is actually a way bigger sore spot than expected. Because of her unsavory line of work, Zora missed her mother's funeral, and that guilt of that transgression weighs heavy on her soul. So much so that it makes her wary of Krebs far sooner than anyone else on the expedition, and sows the seeds for her eventual decision to embrace virtue and turn her back on Parkergenics. It's enough substance to make her decisions throughout the story feel compelling and, more importantly, motivated. The same goes for Duncan Kincaid, who I expected even less substance from, if I'm being honest. Duncan is a tertiary character on par with the likes of Muldoon in the original Jurassic Park. I fully expected him to be a nothing character brought to life by Mahershala Ali's charisma alone. But again, there was actually something to him on the page that made him feel like a real person to a degree. Duncan tragically lost his young son, and that death has eroded every aspect of his life. His marriage ended painfully, and he's found himself stuck in a line of work he no longer has the stomach for, in large part because his son's death has sparked a desire to leave a more meaningful mark on the world. It also made him incredibly protective of children, which informs his decision to redirect the expedition to rescue the shipwrecked Delgados, all four of whom are given similar death. Ruben is a divorced girl dad who's struggled to make peace with his eldest daughter, Teresa's coming of age, a struggle personified by Xavier, her slacker boyfriend who adopts an aloof, emotionally detached affect in an attempt to mask his deep-seated insecurity, but ultimately shows his hand when he dives into dinosaur-infested waters to save Teresa without a second thought. Again, you could argue I'm being thankful for scraps, but I don't think that's the case because it's really all I need from what are ultimately supporting characters. It's enough to endear me to them, invest me in their journeys, and make the fact that their actions are ultimately what is propelling the story feel organic. Of all the characters in the film, though, Dr. Henry Loomis is easily the most pleasant surprise. On one hand, that's probably not actually as surprising as I'm making it sound given how effortlessly charming Jonathan Bailey is as a performer, but the film's marketing had me expecting a fairly one-note character, the nebbish academic. And don't get me wrong, I love this trope, but it's hardly a revelation in a series famous for making scientists cool. So imagine my delights when Loomis wound up being a worthy standard bearer for this tradition. Dr. Loomis is great. He isn't a total subversion of what I was expecting. He's very much a nerdy bookworm, but he has layers. There's an unexpected wildness to the character that gave him dimension. Despite a seemingly meek exterior, he's a bit of an adrenaline junkie, almost to a fault. He volunteers to fire the darts at the Mosasaur without properly considering his ability to endure the environmental hazards involved in such a task. He charges headfirst towards the Titanosauruses and takes on the task of rappelling into the Quetzalcoatlus' den despite it being more taxing than he anticipated. He's also a man of strong moral conviction, believing without a shadow of a doubt in the sanctity of the dinosaurs' lives. He also believes in preserving the moral and ethical purity of science and harbors deep disdain for those who would pervert that for their own gain. Beliefs that inform his desire to subvert Parkergenics' plans to make a proprietary drug out of a dinosaur DNA. This nuance isn't limited to the characters either. Even as someone who was skeptical of the idea going in, I have to admit the film managed to bring me around on the mutant dinosaurs, in large part thanks to the sophistication of their implementation. 2 of the last 3 Jurassic World films had centered on monstrous hybrid dinosaurs, and I really wasn't particularly interested in watching yet another iteration of that idea. Sure, the hybrid idea worked well in those films, particularly in the first Jurassic World, where it was used to make a point about the absurd and obscene outcomes of applying a capitalistic perpetual growth mindset to scientific innovation. But it was played out. Worse still, it only incentivized the films to present the dinosaurs as vicious killing machines as opposed to animals, an impulse the earlier Jurassic entries had made a point to avoid whenever possible. But, to my surprise, that isn't the case in Rebirth at all. For starters, the mutants aren't really a massive factor in the story at all. The D-Rex only shows up in the prologue and then again in the third act to cause a little chaos, while the Mutadons only show up once or twice to establish that these strange, unnatural creatures only come out at night. I'm sure for some, their lack of presence until the third act is a point of contention, but for me personally, I think they work much better in this limited capacity. It means they never get a chance to overstay their welcome or overshadow the actual dinosaur species that are, in my opinion, infinitely more compelling. But perhaps more significantly, the reason the wound-up mutants worked for me is because they actually tie into the broader themes of the series in a new and interesting way. You see, Ile Saint-Hubert was essentially InGen's trash can, a place to discard defective biological experiments, because as multi-million-dollar assets, destroying them humanely would risk showing up as a loss on financial disclosures and incite panic among shareholders. One of the most prominent themes in Michael Crichton's novels and their subsequent adaptations is this idea that scientific progress and capitalism are fundamentally incompatible in the long term. While it can be argued a competitive free market breeds innovation, science is ultimately about the pursuit of knowledge, while capitalism is about the accumulation of wealth. And while those two goals can coexist in theory, the uncomfortable reality is that science conducted within a market setting will always prioritize higher earnings over high learning. The profit motive will inevitably compromise the ethical pursuit of science and result in abuse and exploitation. I mean, Hammond and his scientists literally create life they have no idea how to accommodate because they want to build a commercial theme park for tourists. The point doesn't get much more on the nose than that. If Jurassic Park is consistent on one thing, it's this: science shouldn't be for sale. Rebirth decides to take this idea and decides to zero in on the way in which the profit motive incentivizes the inhumane treatment of the animals InGen is creating. As Loomis points out when Krebs reveals the truth about the island, these mutants should have been destroyed years ago. Keeping them alive is an act of cruelty, and yet InGen did so without flinching. They even built an entire high-tech facility to contain them and continue doing research. It's perverse and serves to make the mutants somewhat sympathetic. Sure, they're vicious creatures that are a blight on the natural ecosystem, terrorizing the more conventional dinosaurs almost as much as they prey on the human interlopers, but the context of their creation is profoundly tragic in the vein of a classic monster movie. Throughout the film, we're repeatedly shown how the pursuit of profit corrupts the soul, whether it's Zora and Duncan opining a lifetime of detached immorality working as mercenaries so that they can get rich enough to finally get out of the game for good, or Krebs, who lets Teresa fall to what he thinks will be a watery grave to prevent the authorities learning about their mission to the island, which would shut down the operation and compromise his corporate overlords. This self-interested worldview is contrasted against the likes of Loomis, who firmly believes science belongs to everyone and convinces Zora to forsake her multi-million-dollar fee to help him take the dino DNA samples so that they can make them public. This tension between humanity's capacity for selfishness and selflessness is itself a broader theme throughout the story. There's a great scene towards the middle of the movie where Loomis and Krebs get into a debate over survival and evolution, during which Loomis remarks that intelligence is actually an overrated evolutionary trait. Despite our relative intellect when compared with the dinosaurs, it only took humanity several thousand years to bring itself to the brink of self-destruction, whereas dinosaurs ruled the Earth for millions of years, and their reign only ended because of a literal cosmic event wiping them off the face of the planet. During their brief debate, Krebs proudly gloats to Loomis that humans rule the Earth. This statement isn't just a quip to win an argument, it's actually a window into how Krebs and people like him see the world. To them, the natural order is a hierarchy, not unlike capitalism, in which those with the most rule. Humans have the brain power to dominate, and so therefore it is their right. But this is patently absurd because nature doesn't work that way. The film repeatedly emphasizes the fact that nature is in fact symbiotic. We see it with the Spinosauruses, who help the Mosasaurs hunt in exchange for protection, and Dilophosaurus, who scavenges the remains of the T-Rex's kill, or the herd of Titanosauruses, who live in a massive herd and are explicitly shown to be loving and nurturing. Yes, there is conflict in nature, but it's just one small part of an interconnected ecosystem. This is the natural order, and humanity risks annihilation in continuing to defy it as persistently as it has. As Loomis sees it, the only way to remedy that is to rethink our relationship to each other, to start thinking as a species rather than individuals, to be symbiotic, like the dinosaurs, who managed to survive far longer than we have thus far. This, Rebirth posits, is the kind of thinking that will save us. For all the examples as there are throughout the film of self-centered thinking ending in catastrophe, there are just as many examples of the opposite, of compassion and humanity yielding positive outcomes for everyone. This is probably most evident by way of the Delgado family. Duncan's decision to rebuke Krebs' selfishness and divert course to respond to their SOS doesn't just save the lives of 4 innocent civilians, it sets off a chain reaction that ultimately upends Krebs' whole scheme. Had he not saved them, Krebs never would have tried to silence Teresa, raising Zora's suspicions and giving the rest of the crew cause to turn on him. Had none of this happened, it's possible Parker Genix would have ended up with the samples. It's for this reason that I have a hard time accepting the notion that the Delgado subplot was superfluous. Sure, the A-B structure it necessitates is a bit clunky at points, like when the family has to be separated from the group yet again once they crash on the island so that everything that went down on the boat can remain a mystery to the main crew until the third act, when their paths once again converge with unexplored convenient timing. But that's something I'm more than willing to give a pass, given how effectively their presence demonstrates this larger idea. Through the Delgados, we get to see this changing status quo from the perspective of ordinary people. To them, dinosaurs are a distant concern, something that feels more distant than it actually is. I mean, quite literally. They embark on a sailing trip, assuming they're well outside the range of any dinosaurs, only to be swiftly confronted by the reality that this isn't the case. Something that the Jurassic films have always been good at is using the dinosaurs as a proxy for nature and our relationship to it. In the original, InGen's attempt to control them revealed the futility in thinking we can bring nature to heel. This time around, the public's apathy for the dinosaurs is reminiscent of our species' collective disinterest in acknowledging the rapid death of our planet. Like many of the Jurassic sequels that preceded it, Jurassic World Rebirth is so much more interesting than it gets credit for. The movie is by no means perfect. For instance, the first 20 or so minutes is a little rough. It's like you can see David Koepp rushing to get all his ducks in a row as quickly as possible so that he can get into the meat of the story. But once the scene setting was out of the way, I couldn't help but understand why the film was in such a rush to get there, because it really packs a punch, man. The action is exhilarating, the ideas are compelling, and perhaps most unexpectedly, the heart is present. I can't remember the last time one of these movies genuinely filled me with awe the way Loomis's encounter with the Titanosaurus did. Is it a tad derivative? I mean, yeah, but like so many of the film's homages to the past, it remembers that a callback that doesn't understand why the original moment worked is pretty much worthless. The Titanosaurus scene works because it isn't just about the wonder of looking at a majestic creature. No, it's about experiencing joy with the characters, reveling in their passion. That is what makes the moment sing. And this, above all else, is why Rebirth works.